You know, even if Joe Biden wins, our republic is still vulnerable to another Donald Trump, and this time it might be one like Thom, who is a little more fascist and a little more competent. Check this out. Leave your comments, ding the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Today is the anniversary of the ratification 100 years ago today, the 19th Amendment, which gave, in 1920, which gave women the right to vote, or to, I think, correctly frame it, with which women seized the right to vote. So there's just a lot going on, and and an enormous amount of news. But I think that the main theme of last night's Democratic convention, repeated over and over by multiple people, and we'll dig into that a little bit as we go through the 3 hours of our program today, is that Joe Biden is a decent man. A good guy that you can trust who actually has empathy and cares about other people, none of which are qualities that Donald Trump has. And that Donald Trump is corrupt, is incompetent, and is mentally ill. And I would add a coda to that as a consequence of his corruption, his incompetence, and his mental illness, he is actually a danger to the United States and has harmed the United States, has hurt us both domestically and abroad. Which raises three questions. How did we end up with a corrupt, incompetent, and mentally ill president? How did he get enough power to be able to twist the levers of government toward his own reelection, something that has not been done in the past in the United States and something that's a hallmark of tin pot dictators? And why do Republicans in the United States Senate continue to support him? And I think all the answers come back to basically two things. The answers of where did this power come from, by and large, setting aside the police powers for a moment, it goes back to 1976, 1978, the Buckley decision and the Bellotti decision before the U.S. Supreme Court that said, for the first time in the history of America, and this is what set up the Reagan Revolution, for the first time in the history of America, if a politician is owned by a billionaire, if a billionaire provides enough money to that politician that they are singularly responsible for that politician having their job, and they dance to the tune of that politician in all matters, we used to call that corruption. We used to call that bribery. It used to be illegal. The Supreme Court in 1976 said, if a billionaire wants to own a politician, or 10 politicians, or 100 politicians, or a whole political party, that is now, henceforth, forevermore, world without end, amen, going to be considered protected free speech under the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. And then 2 years later, in the First National Bank versus Bellotti decision, the Supreme Court said, oh, by the way, we're extending this right to corporations, corporate persons, as well as to individual human being billionaires. And this began, basically the corruption of both the Democratic and Republican parties, but the Republican Party sold out entirely in 1980. It put Reagan over the top, and it massively expanded the influence of lobbyists who were the bribers, because now the bribees, the politicians, could openly take money and gifts and all kinds of goodies from these lobbyists. And, so the lobbyists, the industries, set out on a 40-year campaign that brought us what today we call the Trump administration, where literally every, I believe it's literally every, there might be a couple of exceptions to this rule, but if there are, they're not at the top of my consciousness. Every major government agency is now run by either a lobbyist or a person with an axe to grind, a billionaire with an axe to grind, like, Betsy DeVos over at Education, or billionaire Wilbur Ross over at Commerce. But basically the rest of them, the EPA is run by a coal lobbyist, the Interior Department is run by an oil lobbyist, the FCC is run by a telecom lobbyist. The list goes on and on and on. So he's basically corrupted all these things. And that's because of the Supreme Court decision. And then after 9/11, Congress created this new super police agency, consolidating a whole bunch of different police agencies together and intelligence agencies together, using the word that Rudolf Hess used first in 1937 when he introduced Adolf Hitler at the Nuremberg rally, where they decided to borrow a word from the Zionists who were trying to create a homeland for Jewish people in what we now call Israel in the Middle East. They borrowed that word, the Nazis, that word homeland, Heimat in German. They borrowed that word to apply to what had always previously been called the fatherland. And now it was called the homeland. And so, Bush took this word that had never been used to describe the United States. We never called this the homeland. This country is literally only the homeland to Native Americans. But it's got that good blood and soil, blood and earth, Blut und Erd, sound to it that the Nazis were so fond of. So George Bush and Dick Cheney named this new organization the Homeland Security Department. And all these massive police powers were reconsolidated or highly consolidated and concentrated under the office of the president, which is, why we were able to see Trump use these powers in Lafayette Park and here in Portland, as well as on our southern border. And he's using them now to track down and selectively prosecute people who are protesting in favor of democracy and against fascism. They are anti-fascists, Antifa. And Donald Trump is, he's often sabotaged by his own incompetence and his own mental illness. Like he blurted out like the post office thing, right? And had he not said that, probably he would have gotten away with a hell of a lot more of it than he did. But the next Republican president who wants to be a fascist dictator, I'm looking at you, Tom Cotton, will probably not be as impaired or as incompetent as Donald Trump. And we need to get ready for that. To save our republic, we need an immediate national discussion about how to break up or at least constitutionally constrain the Department of Homeland Security and get money out of politics at all levels. Now, that's assuming that we do take some political power. In Louisiana, for example, the Secretary of State, Kyle Ardoin, has a new plan. If you want an absentee ballot in Louisiana, you want to vote in the election without exposing yourself to COVID, right now, the way the Louisiana law is being enforced is that if you want an absentee ballot, you have to you have to give an excuse. And one of the acceptable excuses is, I have a pre-existing condition that puts me at risk for getting COVID. Like I'm over 50, or I'm overweight, or I have heart disease, or I have diabetes, or I have high blood pressure, whatever. But see, the problem with that is that at least a third of Americans have pre-existing conditions that make COVID very dangerous for them. So what he wants to do is say that you can only get an exemption, a COVID exemption, to get an absentee ballot in Louisiana if you have tested positive for the coronavirus. If you are on death's door, if you are really sick, and you can get a positive test, which is damn hard to do, because basically you can only get the test if you show up and say, I've got symptoms in Louisiana. And if you can get that test and it is positive, then you can vote if you're still alive. Right. Meanwhile, an 82-year-old man, Don White, in Humble, Texas, says he's been tracking his medications. They're 2 weeks late. It's been sitting for 10 days on the floor of the North Houston post office. His daughter had to get his heart medication at the local drugstore to hold him over.